Good morning. Arguably the best known words in mountaineering are because it's there. Anybody know who said that? Mallory, that's right. It wasn't Hillary. Hillary said something else which I won't repeat in church when he came down the mountain. Yeah, it was George Mallory. When it was a famous retort when somebody asked him, "Why did you climb Everest?" or "Why do you want to climb Everest?" He simply says, "Because it's there." Because it's there. Standing 29,029 feet, 8,848 meters, Everest is the highest mountain in the world. And for about 100 years, mountaineers and adventurers have been clamoring or lured to Everest to try to conquer the summit. In 1921 was the first time the British expedition went there to give it a crack. They didn't quite make it. And then in May 1953 is when Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay actually summited. Between 1921 and 1953, there have been about 10 official expeditions, 2 other sort of crazy solo attempts. 13 people had died on the mountain. Earlier this year, I think it was May this year, they recorded the 305th recorded death on the mountain as people have tried to summit and go after Mount Everest. It's a dangerous, dangerous endeavour. The highest parts of Everest are a dangerous place to try to exist, or a dangerous place to try to live. If you want to summit Everest, and thankfully these guys aren't, Stephen and Jono aren't doing this, so Liz isn't here, so she doesn't need to get nervous about this. But you don't just climb up Everest, you actually work your way through a series of camps. You start at base camp, which is about 5,400 metres up, and then you work your way through this ice flow, and then you get to Camp 1. And Camp 1 is basically, it's a plateau, but on the plateau you don't want to get too close to the ice, the Lhotse wall, which is going up next, because avalanches might come down there. But if you camp on the plateau, you've got to be careful because there are crevices underneath the snow, and if you camp anywhere near a small crevice in the morning, at night by the morning, you might find you're actually at the bottom of a crevice and possibly dead by the morning. It's a dangerous, dangerous place to stay. And so from the plateau, you go up to Camp 2, and that's actually a rocky patch just on the base of the Lhotse wall, which is this massive wall leading up a lot of the way up to the top. And you camp there for a night, and you've got great views apparently down the valley. And it's probably the last sort of proper meal you get before you go further up the mountain. By the time you get to Camp 3, you don't get all the way up the Lhotse wall, you actually camp on ledges on the Lhotse wall on Camp 3. And then by the time you get to Camp 4, you're at 26,000 feet, 8,000 metres. Everybody gets really silent when they get to this camp. It's like a lunar landscape, apparently. They know they're on the edge of what's referred to as a death zone. And they know within the next 48 hours, quite likely some of them won't return. That's what it's like to summit Everest. And when climbers line up and they get ready and they know they're about to go over up past 26,000 feet mark, the 8,000 metre mark, they know that once they go above that point, they're actually literally dying. Their body is dying. There's not enough oxygen for them to survive. Sleeping becomes difficult. Their muscles start to wear away. There's often nausea and vomiting related with altitude sickness. For some, there's a risk their brains will swell and they'll die. For others, their lungs will fill with fluid and they'll die. Some go blind through snow blindness, or their blood vessels in their eyes literally burst as they go higher up into the death zone. Nobody wants to live in the death zone. You're not designed to live in the death zone. Every moment you're there, you know that you're dying. Good morning. It's a good way to start this service, isn't it? It's like this is a thoroughly depressing way to start the day. But, it's interesting. I think when you go up there, you know that you're actually in an environment that is going to hurt you and is going to ruin you and is seeking to kill you. You know you're in that environment. Everybody that goes there knows that, hey, Once we go beyond Camp 4, we're actually in the death zone. So they're aware of the effects, they're aware of the environment they're in. But I think sometimes we can be in death zones and it's a lot less obvious. It feels normal, and we don't realize that they're actually in an environment that can ruin us and hurt us and kill us. And in Ephesians chapter 2, Paul does a couple of things. One, he wants to alert us to the fact that, hey, we actually live in a death zone. And if we're not attentive, there are a number of things that want to kill us, that bring death to us if we're not attentive. And then he wants to talk about how God can actually repair that which is broken in us as we find ourselves living, in a sense, in the death zone. Listen to our condition as Paul says it in Ephesians chapter 2, verses 1 and 2. As for you, you were dead in your transgressions and sins in which you used to live. He's saying, he's not saying, well, he's simply saying you're dead. Because, by the way, you thought you were alive. He's saying you're actually dead. Now, it's funny, we hear that and we go, well, actually, I'm pretty sure I'm alive. Correct? And we know plenty of people that are supposedly dead, but they're actually alive. And so what Paul is actually alluding to is the fact that when we go right back to the start of the Bible, you've got Adam and Eve, and they're created to live with God. Humanity is created to live with God, and there's this beautiful relationship between God and humanity. And I love that picture. There's one part in the early parts of Genesis where God is walking in the cool of the evening. And there's this beautiful relationship, this unfettered relationship between God and humanity. But then sin enters the world, and death enters the world. And it results in immediately spiritual death, in a sense, spiritual estrangement, distance from God. And obviously there's ultimately we'll all physically die. And Paul's trying to alert us to that particular reality. He's saying we're dead. We're in the death zone. And he says, why are you dead? And there are a couple of reasons why he says these are the things that kill you. You need to be aware of what's killing you. When you're climbing Everest, you know the dangers about edemas, about oxygen, about exhaustion, about the fear of avalanche. You know all the different things that can kill you when you're on the mountain. And you prepare as best you can for them. So Paul's saying these are the things that are killing us. First of all, we are dead in our transgressions and sins. This is what's killing us. That word for transgressions is paraptoma, which means it's a false step. It's a crossing over a boundary. It's committing to do wrong. It's if we have laws and instructions and guidelines, it's we know what we ought to do and we choose not to. We choose to commit something against them. Sometimes we refer to these as sins of commission. We know what God is telling us to do, but we choose to go against what God is telling us to. He's saying that choice is killing us. Secondly, the other word he uses for sin is hamartia. It means missing the mark. It's falling short. It's when we're not actually deliberately doing something wrong. We're just not doing what is good. It's when we see injustice and we do nothing about it. It's when we know we ought to be generous and we aren't. We see somebody in need and we ignore them. It's a sin, if you like, of omission. It's what we know we should have done, but we choose not to do. And the reality is we do both, not necessarily in equal amounts. But sometimes there are things that we know we ought not to do, and we just do them anyway. And there are things that we know we should have done, and nobody would have known, but we know that we really should have stepped into that moment and done something. Commission, omission. He's saying we do both. And he says these choices lead us to death. They're killing us, and they're killing our relationship with God. And in verse 3, he goes further with this idea. He says, all of us also lived among them at one time, gratifying the desires of our sinful nature and following its desires and thoughts. He's saying that we have this capacity. We take noble things and we turn them into base things. We take hunger and we turn it to gluttony. We take our need for sleep and we turn it to sloth. We take sex and we turn it into lust. We are broken, is what he's saying. We have this inclination to take things that should be good and could be good, and we take them and we pursue them in such ways that actually lead us away from God, that contravene God's best for us, God's desire for us, the very best for us. And so he said, first of all, what's killing us? The choices we make. The things that we know we ought to do and things we know we ought not to do, the things that are noble that we turn into base. He's saying base things. So all those choices are actually killing us, creating a greater separation between us and God. But then he goes on to say, not everything that is hurting us or killing us is internal. It's not just all here. He says there are things that are outside that create an environment that are killing us as well. Paul's very aware of the spiritual nature of our existence. In Ephesians 6:13, he says, our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces in the heavenly realms. In verse 2, he simply says, you formerly walked according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air, or the ruler of the kingdom of the air. So what he's saying is, and we'll look at this more fully when we get to Ephesians chapter 6, but what he is saying is, make no mistake, there is a very real, literal enemy that is against you, that there is a spiritual dimension to this world. It's not just all about my choices. There is this adversary, the devil, the enemy, and he is actively involved to try to create a division between us and God, to lead us toward death, to bring about destruction for us. And he's saying, that's real. And when you live this in this world, when you walk this journey, he's saying, that influence is real. That is part of the reality of the existence that we endure. And then he writes, we have our nature, we have this enemy, and then we also have what he refers to as the values of this world. He writes, we walked according to the course or the ways of this world. And so when he talks about this world, he's actually talking about that which is temporal, that which is now. He's not saying everything of the world is terrible and awful. It's not like, there are only good people in here and bad people out there. That's not what he's saying at all. But he's trying to alert us to the fact that, hey, don't assume that everything in our world, everything in our culture, everything that is influencing you and driving you, all the thoughts that are trying to direct your thoughts, don't assume that they're neutral or even always good. Sometimes they're temporal, sometimes they're marked by evil. He's talking about those things in our culture, in our world, that are marked by having no reference or concern for the things of God. Our world has its own values, its own ways of thoughts, its own worldview, which can lead to death, not life. And Paul is saying we can look at our world, for example, and we can see injustice and poverty and hunger and abuse and war and environmental destruction. And there should be something in us as we look at that, we ought to say that's not the way it's supposed to be. And then there seems to be values which are applauded or people get away with in our world, and we scratch our head and say, we don't understand why, but it just happens. People cheat and steal and they get away with it and often prosper. And you might be in a company and somebody is doing something all the wrong way and doing all the wrong things, and they get the promotion, and the person that works hard and plays by the rule gets overlooked. The person with the gun who does violence seems to get respected, and the peacemaker is ignored. And then sometimes we look at the rhythms of the world and go, what is going on? And Paul's saying that's those values and the temptation to sort of to live by that set of rules, we need to resist. Anyone ever seen the show Survivor, just out of interest? Oh, come on. We've got to do some work here, really. All right. It's Survivor has been on, I don't know, probably, how long? 20 years? 20. Yeah, at least.
I couldn't find, I don't know, probably.
Probably been on 20 years. And I've actually watched every episode of every season just about, I reckon. And basically the way Survivor works, for those who don't know, is you get a collection of the strangers. I think it's about 20 odd. You put them on a deserted location, usually a deserted island now, and they've got to survive there for 39 days. But the catch is that not only are they surviving, they're actually trying to eliminate one another. So every third day, they go through a series of challenges, and then they have what's called a tribal council. And they decide who are they going to vote off? And there's a bit of a motto for the show. It's called Outwit, Outlast, Outplay, which is code for lie, cheat, and steal. Right? And I love this show, but people do terrible, despicable things in this show. And it seems like whatever morality they bring into the show, because of the bubble they're in, because of the environment they live in that show, they seem to put all the morality aside and go, this is the way the survival world works. And so we will do whatever we want. And it's disgraceful. And there's one season about 10 years ago. Disgraceful, but very entertaining. Right? In 2009, there was a Survivor Samoa. Okay? And it had one of the most notorious characters ever on the show, a guy called Russell Hantz. And Russell Hantz was this guy that... he was nasty, he was a bully, he tried to play with the minds of those on his team. Like at night time, he would get the water canteens and they didn't have much water. He would have his fill and then he'd get everybody else's canteens and just pour them out so they wake up dehydrated in the morning. If he found somebody's sock, he would burn a sock in the fire so they wake up in the morning and only have one sock. Right? He would promise things to everybody and then go back on them all the time. He was terrible and he was despicable and he made the final three, which means you're a chance to win $1 million if you're in the final three. There's another guy called Mick who made the final three, and there was another character by the name of Natalie White, another person by the name of Natalie White. And Natalie White was a polar opposite to Russell. You know, she'd meet with people and she'd talk about Christian quotes that she enjoyed and Christian authors that she'd enjoyed. She tried to live out an ethical game in this crazy survivor world. But for many, they looked at her and said, you didn't really play the game. That's not how you play this game. You're a bit of a non-starter. And so they get to the final, and you've got Mick, who nobody really is going to care for or vote for, right? And you've got Natalie, and you've got Russell. And who wins in a world like that? And so we're all primed and ready to know who's going to win. And then a guy by the name of Eric gets up and he gives one of the most famous survivor speeches ever, because you've got, towards the end of the show, you've got about 9 people that have been voted out. And usually the final 3 have had a hand in that. And they get to vote on who's going to win. And so they ask questions in the final tribal council and they decide who's going to be the one that we're going to reward for playing the best game, who outwitted, outlasted, outplayed everybody. It's Russell, clearly. And so Eric gets up and he gives this speech. And this is the speech that he gave. This goes down in survivor folklore. Okay, you all want to watch it now, correct? Such a good show, right? Oh, don't you love Eric, though? What's Eric doing? He's calling out the culture of Survivor. He's saying, why on earth did we reward this and think this is okay and this is not okay? And I think that we live in a culture, if you like, that sometimes that our culture is good, bad, and neutral. That's a reality of the culture we live in. But there's some things in culture that are bad, that are poisoning us. That's what Paul's trying to alert us to. He says, we shouldn't be silent on this. We shouldn't ignore it. We shouldn't let it go unchecked in our lives or the lives of others. Otherwise, we give it ground. And here's the challenge, because too often the culture gives Russell the win. Because Russell did outwit, outlast, outplay. Guess who won the show? Natalie. You know why? Eric got everybody else to question what they just accepted as normal. She won 7 votes to 2. She slaughtered Russell. He's never got over it, right? Our culture doesn't cause us to sin or to cheat or to steal, but it creates an environment. There are aspects of culture that create an environment that will kill us if we're not attentive, if we don't call it out. And it's not just calling it out in others, it's actually calling it out, saying, I'm not going to let you or this get inroads into my life because you're going to kill me if I let you go unchecked. If I give ground to that thought or that value or that behaviour. So every now and then we need to give ourselves an Eric little conversation and call out the things that are starting to influence our way of thinking. It creates an environment for death. When we make choices, when we submit to temptation, when we follow the ways of the world, the Bible's pretty clear about the outcome. Paul writes, like the rest, we were by nature deserving of wrath, but because of his great love for us, God, who is rich in mercy, made us alive with Christ, even when we were dead in transgressions. It is by grace you've been saved. Right? There's something in us that I think pushes back on the line, we were by nature deserving of wrath, isn't there? Because Paul's saying, you want to know where this goes? We deserve wrath. When we make these choices against God, when we submit to temptation of the enemy, when we actually follow the ways of this world, goes, this is where it leads. And I think most of us are okay with the idea of justice. We don't mind if somebody breaks into our house, we actually want the police to come and want the person to be caught. We believe in justice, don't we? That's why we have horns in our cars, correct? Somebody cuts us off. We need to alert them to reality they've just done something wrong. All right? There is something in the human psyche where we value that we want things to be dealt with. I think the things that offends us in that particular line is that we might be the object of that wrath. We don't mind if somebody else is the object of that wrath or the sin out there is dealt with, but when Paul is saying, hey, you, meaning us, you're actually killing yourself when you make these choices, when you follow these temptations, when you follow the ways of this world. And this is where you're leading. And he says, we don't like to hear that. And so how do people respond? I think people respond in a couple of different ways. One is we actually just think, oh, well, I'll fix it. I'll do better. Every religion in the world is about, I will do better. I'll perform this ritual, I'll say this prayer, I'll do this good deed, I'll do this sort of thing. I'll fix myself, I'll make myself worthy. You know, I'll follow the teachings of the Quran, I'll follow the eightfold path to enlightenment, I'll just be a good person, whatever it is. I'll just do these things and I'll somehow fix myself. If I have a musical instrument and it's broken, just playing that instrument over and over again won't actually fix the instrument, will it? It will never make it pitch perfect. It's just doing the same thing. It actually needs somebody to come in and fix it so it can achieve its purpose again. And so religion, if you like, says, I will try to fix myself, but it doesn't actually solve the problem. We can't fix ourselves. The gospel is not about how do I fix me. And in fact, I wonder if we even try that hard to fix ourselves. Jerry Bridges, in his book, Transforming Grace, says we don't even try that hard. He writes, almost no one tries to earn his way to heaven. Martin Luther, prior to his conversion, being a notable exception. Rather, almost everyone assumes that what he or she is already doing is sufficient to merit. Do you hear what he's saying? He goes, even if we know we're broken, we actually deny that we're actually all that broken, or we deny that we need to be fixed. We deny that we're dying. We deny that there are things that are causing us to die. We deny there are things that are putting us outside of our relationship with God. We just think that we're acceptable. We've done enough. We're moral enough. We're good enough. Or sometimes we just want to point out how broken everybody else. We say, okay, I'll admit that I'm broken, but I'm not as bad as Stalin or Pol Pot or Hitler or Osama bin Laden. I'm not as bad as those guys. And sometimes we don't even do that. Sometimes it's just a bit close. So I'm not as bad as that guy. You know, they were gossiping and they were judging and their theology is really, really off. And so I know I'm not perfect, but I'm not like that person over there. And so we play the comparison game. But the story of the life with Jesus is not about how good you are compared to others. And it's not about whether you've met the standard you've set for yourself. The story of the gospel is more like this. But because of his great love for us, God, who is rich in mercy, made us alive with Christ. Even when we were dead in transgressions. It is by grace you're being saved. And God raised us up with Christ and sealed us with him in the heavenly realms in Christ Jesus, in order that in the coming ages he might show the incomparable riches of his grace expressed in his kindness to us in Christ Jesus. For it is by grace you've been saved through faith, and this not from yourselves, it is the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast. For we are God's workmanship, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do. And so, first of all, he's saying, how's this dealt with? Well, there is wrath, there is punishment. The Romans says the wages of sin is death. There's something that needs to be dealt with. And what Paul is saying, reminding us, he goes, well, Jesus actually takes care of it. He enters this world, he lives a perfect life, and then he goes to a cross on our behalf. He substitutes his life for ours. And so the debt is paid. Was there a death? Yes, there was. Was there God's wrath poured out? Yes, there was. Was there justice served? Yes, it was. Was it on me? No. That's how Paul says it works. I was estranged from God. I was distanced from God. I deserved the wrath of God. And what did I get? What did you get? We get mercy and grace in reply. That's what we get. That's what he's reminding us of here. We don't get what we deserve. But we're not made right by denial. We're not made right by trying to fix ourselves. We're not made right by pointing out how bad everybody else is in comparison. We're made right when we allow Jesus to fix us. I love this story. There was a Japanese shogun by the name of Ashikawa Yoshimasa, which I'm totally butchered his name, I'm sure, so my apologies right now. Right? He was the 8th shogun of his actual shogunate. And he was sort of best known for this. He was best known because he had a broken teacup. That's why this guy was known. Japanese legend is that in the late 15th century, this guy, he cracks his favorite tea bowl. And they were quite expensive, and they were quite rare. And there's a particular time in Japanese history where they valued just the fine china that they had. And so when he cracks his favorite teacup or tea bowl, he sends it off to China to get repaired. And when it came back, they'd fix it the way they always fix these sorts of things in that day, at that time. They got the broken pieces, they glued them together or held them together, and they get these crude staples and they staple along the crack. And they pull it together and it's fixed. And so he'd sent his tea bowl off, it came back, and he looked at it and he was disgusted. He was appalled at what it looked like. And so, not wanting to discard his bowl, he got together some of his best craftsmen and said, can we do something more aesthetically pleasing? Can we fix this? Can we do something different? And embedded in Japanese culture, as I understand it, this deep belief that beauty can actually be found in that which is flawed or old or broken. Not everything has to be new and pristine. And so you have these craftsmen, and what they do is they grab his bowl and they remove all the ugly staples. They get the broken pieces and they carefully glue them back together. And then they do something remarkable. Into the cracks, they pour gold. And they develop a new art form called kintsugi. Kint meaning golden, sugi meaning repair. It's a golden repair. In the end, they get this piece of art that is utterly unique and precious and beautiful. But the flaws aren't hidden. The flaws are there for everyone to see. They're not denied. They're not pointing out how broken every other pot is in comparison, every other bowl is in comparison. It's just saying, I've been repaired, and look at what's been flowed into the cracks. It's repaired me. And something that was broken is made whole and is transformed into something far more valuable. What does Paul say to us? He says, you are God's workmanship. Right? He takes us with all our flaws and our brokenness and our scars and our chips, and he recreates us into something beautiful. Every human being knows what it's like to laugh and to cry and to mourn and to grieve and to get beat up and to have hope. We all experience traumatic events. We all have regrets. We all bear shame. We all know what it is to be broken and flawed. That's what it is to be human. And Kintsugi tells the story of what Christ does for us in a way. With all our imperfections, with all our failures, it tells the story of the master craftsman who fills the cracks, the scars, the brokenness in our life, who makes us whole again, who makes you more beautiful than you ever dared imagine you could be, and more valuable than you realized that you were, because into your flaws, into your cracks, he pours gold. And he makes you this beautiful work of art. And he does that. He recreates us through his grace. And he pours his grace into all our brokenness. He's saying, you don't have to deny who you are. You don't have to point out how broken everybody else is. You can't fix yourself. Let me repair you. Let me flow into all those crevices, all those chips, all those breaks. Let me pour my grace into you. And when we are courageous enough to be seen with our cracks and our flaws and our seams of grace, then our life starts to tell the story of the master craftsman who pours grace into our brokenness, who shows what he can do, shows that we are his workmanship, we are his handicraft. Yet it's never going to be realized when we pretend we're perfect. It's never going to be realized when we deny we have flaws. The reality is you have flaws and scars and brokenness, and everybody else sees them anyway. There's no point pretending we don't have them. And so we've got to decide, what is our confidence based on? Our confidence before God, our confidence that we'll somehow survive the death zone. Those things which is chipping away and breaking us and wants to destroy us. This environment, this inclination, internal, external, which is trying to tear us apart. How do we survive this? Is it through personal performance? Is it through denial? Is it through comparison with others? Or is it through grace? And when we're courageous enough to say, I am broken, but look what God is doing in me, then we actually tell the story of the golden repair in our life. Of how we came through the death zone, how we survived the death zone, how we came out alive. And when we live this way, our lives beautifully retell the story of what the master craftsman has done for us. But I think it also says to the person who is smart enough and savvy enough and humble enough and courageous enough to say, I am broken, I am chipped, I am flawed. We're saying to them, guess what? You too can be made into this beautiful work of art if you just let his grace flow into you. Do you follow? Let me pray. Father, as we enter another week with our brokenness, our limitations, our flaws, Father, I thank you that you free us from having to pretend that we are perfect, free from having to pretend that we can figure this out. That, Father, that we can actually celebrate not how good we are, but how great you are. We thank you that you pour your grace into us, you heal us. Father, forgive us those times when we want to pretend that we've done this ourselves, because when we do that, we're not telling the proper story. We're not telling your story. We're telling a false story. Father, let us be courageous enough to let people see our flaws, our cracks, our brokenness. And let's be courageous enough to tell the story of you, the one who poured grace into those spaces. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.